So picking off where we kind of last left off, during my gap year, kind of wrapped up in the last 3 months in the Netherlands, and I didn't work. I just spent a lot of time with my partner's family at the time there. So there was a lot of time for me to actually do a lot of thinking in terms of what I wanted in my life because I dropped out of school. And I knew that I didn't want to go into university. I didn't want to get a uni degree. If I wanted to go to uni down the track, I knew that I could do that and there were different pathways for it. But I knew I had to kind of come back and explore what kind of job opportunities there were available. So when I came back to Australia, I remember jumping on Seek, sitting there and just having a look at the market and what there kind of was. And that's when I ended up exploring face-to-face fundraising and finding out that it really wasn't for me. But I found my calling, and that was in hairdressing. So it was actually really interesting because growing up, I was always surrounded by hairdressing because my mum was actually an ex-hairdresser. So we had lots of education books and documents and things like that floating around the house, and she had these mannequin heads. So I'd always play with those and ask questions. And I'd always find myself sitting down, in my bedroom watching YouTube videos that had to do with makeup, beauty, and kind of the hair industry. So it was all in the same kind of hub. And I thought, you know what, why not give this a go? Why not give it a bit of a chance? So I remember going to work in my first hair salon, and that was in the eastern suburbs, in a suburb called Woollahra. And the commute was actually pretty hefty because it was about a 2.5 hour commute, door to door, one way. But we kept that up. And I remember working in this first salon. There was about 8 employees, and we actually had all different diverse backgrounds, which was really interesting. So everyone was from different countries. So I remember one colleague being from Sweden, another colleague, she was from the UK, and we also had another colleague who was from France. And then the rest of us were Australian. So about 4 Australians and kind of 3 to 4 other people that were floating around from other countries, but they were there for their own reasons and purposes. So this is really interesting because when I first got into hairdressing, I saw such a big, diverse amount of people that I first of all worked with, but also the clients that kind of came through the door. It was kind of different but interesting because at that age, I wasn't even 18 at that age yet, but being exposed to all of that and not having any work experience under my belt at all, anyone to kind of guide you for that, you're kind of finding your own path along the way. It was super interesting. So for example, as a hairdresser, you'd normally work from Tuesday to Saturdays. So commuting into the city and then changing from the city to the eastern suburbs was interesting because you'd see different people on the train or the buses. But on the weekends, you'd kind of see a bit of a different crowd. And it'd be the same for Thursday nights and Friday nights where you'd see people that going out to go and party, for instance, and you're kind of finishing work, as a hairdresser, finishing around 8, 9 o'clock at night and sometimes later than that. And looking back at it all, I was a super reserved person. I would really keep to myself and I'd enjoy observing people. But what I came to find in hairdressing is that you can't just be an observer, you have to connect with people. That's the best way to go about it because you're a hairdresser. You can't just cut people's hair but not talk to them. You have to communicate with them, right? So you have to understand exactly what it is that they want. What is it they want to achieve? Is it something that's achievable? How do you deliver that message to someone? So if someone's got like close to 3 strands of hair, to be like, well, I'm not actually a hair transplant or a surgeon here. I can't help you with that department. But how do you deliver that message to them? So it was super interesting because you had to build up your communication skills. So I remember my first day in TAFE where we went to a class and there was about 40-something of us and it was such a large class. I remember the teacher saying, we cannot continue this class like this, so just bear with us for this one class because there's too many of you. So she ended up partnering all of us into groups of 2. And I remember this almost as if it was yesterday. So one of us was able to draw, but we weren't able to talk or anything. We could only draw, and the other person was communicating something. So it's interesting to see how everyone kind of wanted to draw the same thing, which was easy, which was a house. But all the houses were all drawn differently. You had houses the size of like your palm. You had like houses the size of your face. And all the windows were all different shapes and sizes too. And sometimes the doors were bigger than the windows and vice versa. So what this taught me in the end is that, communication is key, not just in hairdressing, but in life. If we go back and focus in hairdressing, I was extremely lucky, I think, to have such a supportive team that I worked with. I remember the Swedish girl that I worked with, she was kind of like a mother to me, and she'd nurture me with, reminding myself to put gloves on where we'd do colouring at the basin. You know, even though I thought to myself, I don't really need the gloves. They're a bit annoying. You know, they take a bit of time to put on. But she said, you know, your skin, your body and everything's going to thank you in future for that. And little did Ruth know at the time that that was going to bite me in the bum, because it does add up. With all the little webs that you've got on your hands here, they do add up because they get really dry, and sometimes you can get psoriasis on your inner forearms as well with the bleach and the color sitting there for such a long time, because you're exposed to it more than an ordinary person. You're not just exposed to it for like an hour or two a day. You're exposed hour upon hour upon hours, and it all adds up. So I was really grateful for that. But in terms of communication as well, she kind of taught me how to kind of speak to people, and it built my confidence up in time, because naturally I was such a reserved and quiet person. But it was also really interesting because as an apprentice, you're kind of like a shadow to a senior. So you'd sit there, you'd be able to kind of pass foils to them, and you'd watch them do their art and create something beautiful for someone else at the other side, where they're able to walk out and feel much more confident and love themselves from the outside. And I was able to listen in on some of these conversations that people had. But the one thing that kind of really stuck out to me was hearing the kind of stories that people would share with their hairdresser, such as, you know, I've got a son or I've got a daughter and they're going to school and they're doing XYZ. I don't like it, or I completely support it. So you'd see different sides of the spectrum, right? But it would be super interesting because, you know, they'd go into detail about certain parts in their lives that you wouldn't normally hear or get the opportunity to. So I think as a hairdresser, we were really blessed in a way where you're able to connect with people on that level that you normally wouldn't. You know the saying that kind of goes where the stereotype that goes, hairdressers are like your therapists, comedians, entertainers, doctors, and things like that. It's actually a bit of a truth there, because I think people end up opening up to you about certain things. And there was experiences too that I saw in senior hairdressers that I also shadowed, was where they pointed out cancer on the back of someone's neck or on their scalp because no one else was able to point that out to them. So it was actually pretty fascinating. And the moment that you were able to connect with someone on that level, put the hair aside, you know, on a human level, to say, hey, you've got this mole or something on the back of your skin. I think that's something that you need to go and get checked out. And the client goes off, gets checked out, and they realize, shit, it's actually cancer. So you're able to kind of help someone in that way, even though that's not your direct job. But it was really fascinating to me. And I know that every job out there has probably got their highs and their lows. The grass may be greener on the other side, but looking back at my first job in this salon as a hairdresser, an apprentice hairdresser, it was super interesting because you're on your feet pretty much all day long. The only time that you'd actually get to sit down is when you go to the toilet or you're having a lunch break. And your lunch breaks aren't dictated to you where it's like 12 o'clock on the dot. That's when you can kind of have lunch. It was always working around the diary to see, you know, are the clients in the salon? If there are clients in the salon, the client's the priority. Lunch comes after. And I remember sitting in the salon and we actually had this little window pane that was kind of cut out, but it was tinted. So we could sit out in the back, mix color and, you know, have a chit chat or have our lunches, but we'd always have our eyes on the client. And I thought that was super interesting because it was almost like living your life a bit on autopilot, where it's like okay, kind of got to do this, but client is kind of key to everything. And I saw that with my colleagues that I work with, because you'd see them having their best days sometimes and best weeks. Whereas most of the time that I saw them behind those curtains where we sat there and had lunch, you know, they'd be breaking down and talking about things that they were going through, things that meant to them, which was such as, you know, I've come to Australia, I've left my family behind, I've left my friends behind because I came here for whatever kind of life it is. Whether it's because, you know, they wanted to escape their lives back at home, or that they're just over the country that they were born in, wanting to explore another country. And then the added pressure that, you know, they're working in this hair salon being sponsored so they could continue living in the same country. So I ended up moving away from this hair salon and moved on to another hair salon because I felt like I wasn't being progressed. I wasn't progressing in my hairdressing career and I wanted a bit of a change in scenery. So I ended up moving to another hair salon. And I found this small boutique in Pyrmont, which was much smaller than this other salon that I worked in because there was about 8 of us to begin with. But this other hair salon that I worked in was just my boss and myself. So it was the hand that actually fed me. And that was completely different because it felt like it was going from this there's this whole tribe of us versus it's just us two. It was such an interesting salon to work in as well, because it was almost as if like the world had kind of slowed down a bit. And I think that maybe had to do with the size of the team, because if you can imagine, if there's 8 employees working together in that other salon that I worked in, and there was about 4 to 5 senior hairdressers, those 4 to 5 senior hairdressers would have their clients, but they wouldn't have one client going at the time. They'd have 2 clients almost going simultaneously. So if you do the maths there, plus you've got the juniors in there as well, including myself, trying to make sure that we can maintain all of that, whether it's, if someone needs to have the hair washed versus, okay, I need foils past me, okay, I need color mixed up and topped up, I need a station cleaned or set up as well. So you're kind of floating around and multitasking. It went from kind of go, go, go to almost everything kind of slowed down, which was really nice and refreshing. But it was really interesting because I felt like I got more opportunities that way, working directly with my boss. So it was able to actually build up my confidence and identity as an individual because I got to work directly with him. But I was able to connect with him and also his clients on almost a really interpersonal level, because when he'd have his clients come in, there might be 1 or 2 people, but it wouldn't have like 8 clients going or 10 clients going at the same time, because he could only take in what he was able to do. And around the time that I became 19, I ended up moving as well, because the commute was still kind of killing me, because the time I found that I could use for something else. So my boyfriend and I at the time moved to Pyrmont, which was about a block away from where I was working. And that made such a big difference. But in itself, that was also another experience where it's like, moving out from home, packing up all my belongings, which I didn't have much of, but then buying everything from scratch, from like a couch to a computer to a dining room table and a bed. All those things, and having to plan all of that was an experience in itself. And yeah, you can have your parents and you might have other people that might teach you how to do that, but it's an experience I think that you have to do for yourself to be able to understand what it's kind of like. Someone can kind of tell you how to do something, but it's not until you do it yourself. But then also realizing that you have to do all your utility bills, your taxes, all these things by yourself. And I think it was interesting because at the time I also thought to myself, there are so many friends out there that I knew from school that were going into university, doing all these things in life, and I was thinking to myself, whoa, I feel like I'm on a whole different level and ballpark to them. Not that I was looking up or down at them, it was just day and night kind of difference, because when I'd catch up with friends, you got people talking about, assessments and things like that that they were due, or if they had like a lecture that they had to go to, if they had a spare spot during the day, and all these kind of buzzwords that I didn't know about. But it felt like we were able to still connect, but it was just a bit different because I was already working. I picked up a job and I was picking up life experience. I'm not saying that, if you go to university, you're not going to pick up life experience either, because I think that's the individual and their choice. If they want to pick up a job on the side as well, because I know that there were friends that were studying full-time, but they were working part-time as well. So they can get a bit of an income, but also experience in the field. Going back to hairdressing as well, it was super interesting working for just the hand that fed me too, because when he would go out during the day and do business errands, for example, I was only 19 at that age and I was actually holding down the fort, taking cash payments, FPOS payments, taking bookings over the phone, cutting and washing people's hair. But that actually really propelled me into building up my own confidence and knowing that I could do it. And if I didn't know how to do it, I knew that I'd figure it out myself, or I had him on speed dial so I could call him and ask him, how do I do X, Y, Z? We also had the power of Google. So, looking back at all of that, it was also really crazy, I think, having a 19-year-old run a salon by themselves. These are paying customers that kind of come in and they trust you with all of it. But I knew it was a challenge and I loved every moment of it. And that's when he gave me even more responsibility. So he started going on overseas holidays and I started taking care of the salon from start to finish, all the way from opening up the salon, making sure that everything is set up, making sure that stock was kind of coming in, taking the stock intake to reconciliating, how much money that we'd take in for the day and doing all of that. So I think it was just a crazy experience when you think back about it. But I think not many 19-year-olds can kind of relate to having to almost run a business on behalf of someone at that age. And not long after that, I ended up working at this salon for about So I ended up working at the salon for almost 3 years. And my last year that was there was when I became a qualified senior hairdresser. So I got the opportunity to be able to, bond with all of my boss's clients, but also pick up my own clients along the way. And I think it was really special. Similar to where I worked in the bigger salon and I was able to connect with people, but this was a bit different because I felt like those conversations were more intimate because you didn't have the whole environment of go, 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 I need to do this, I need to do that. You almost kind of got the opportunity to sit down, do their hair, but actually understand those people on a human level. So I had all sorts of different people in the seats, from CEOs to people that were doing their own startups, from people that were university students to getting their first job, or someone having their first baby. So it's all really interesting because, I observed a lot, and the thing that I kind of really saw the most was the way people perceive the world and how they'd perceive themselves. Because you could have someone out there that puts themselves out in a way that they're really super confident, and everything's kind of right for them, but that's what they've got behind the camera lens. But outside of that limelight, then you come and talk to your hairdresser, they break down and they talk to you about their problems, and they shit, eat and cry just like all of us. But it's just understanding exactly what it is that drives them, because everyone's perception of themselves is different to how others perceive them. And it was just a privilege, I think, to be able to have these people allow me into their lives at that level, because you could be a client that just comes in, gets your hair done, but you don't want to connect on that level. But there were so many people that were open to wanting to connect on that level. And I would take some of those relationships and experiences to my grave, because I think we all just want to help each other. I ended up injuring my back in hairdressing, and I don't know exactly what fully caused it to this day, but if I look back at that day, I think it had to do with me cleaning a basin, trying to clean the shampoo and conditioner shelf, but I might have twisted my back in an awkward position and lifted something which might have tweaked my back, and that's what led to a herniated disc. So those that might not know what a herniated disc is, if you want to imagine your spine and the compressions that kind of sit in it, and they have these vertebrae that sit like this, there's normally gas sacs that sit in between there, almost like a tire for your car, that makes it so then they can sit out and spread perfectly. But what happened is one of them had deflated. One of the gas air sacs had deflated. So what happened is that my vertebrae ended up starting to sit on top of each other. And that's when I started to get herniated disc, which is really uncomfortable. For those that live chronically with one, I really feel for those people, because there's only so much you can really do with it. And hairdressing, wearing heels all the time and standing on your feet probably didn't help either. The heels definitely didn't help, that's for sure, because, when you're standing with heels, your back isn't standing like naturally as it should. It's almost like your bum kind of sticks out a bit. So imagine standing in heels for like 10 hours a day on day, running around with them as well, bending over in weird locations. It adds up over time. So that made me start questioning, is hairdressing kind of for me? And what is it about hairdressing that I really love? And could I see myself doing this for the rest of my life? Because when I started looking at all these other hairdressers and barbers, there were some crazy barbers and hairdressers that were still working up to the point of like 70, 80 plus years old. But if you look at the statistics, hairdressers didn't actually last that long because they ended up having health issues, whether it was through the skin, through psoriasis, or having skin chemical reactions, or other reactions such as, hair flying at you. If you're a hairdresser watching this, you probably understand what hair splinters are, and they're really uncomfortable. For those that don't know what hair splinters are, especially if you're cutting male hair and they're really short and sharp, imagine just cutting that with a clip or a pair of scissors and they come at needles at you. So if you've got your skin here, it embeds into your skin. The boss that I worked at the time as well, he actually had it embedded into his gum at some point too. He shared a story with me about someone that he used to work with that actually got it into their eye. They had to go for surgery, get that actually taken out, because otherwise the risk of them losing their sight was really high. There's a lot of risk in hairdressing, and I'm sure it's the same with any other job that there is out there. But the injury made me question a lot, because I ended up going to a chiropractor, and because I lived about a block away, it was normally less than a 5-minute walk to get home. But the day that I know that the injury went down, I went to go see the chiropractor. It took me about 20 minutes to waddle myself home. And that's when everything got put into perspective, where I thought to myself, is this what I want? can I live like this? And also I know that there were routes, maybe not at the time, and now looking back at it and knowing now that, there are other resources and different ways to get better, which is, seeing a physio or going to the gym to strengthen those muscles that might have been weak around that. Or there could have been, the option of surgery as well. But at the time I thought to myself, well, is this really what I really wanted? And to be honest, the one thing that I really loved the most about hairdressing was the customer journey. It was helping people get them from point A to point B to C. But every journey is completely different, so you can't cookie cut that. You're personalizing it, and it was special because every single person that you came across, it was a different journey each time. But the fact that this person had given you the reins to be able to walk with them was just something that you can't get otherwise. And that's what I took with me, and I really sat there and thought to myself, where can I kind of apply this? So I remember sitting day in and day out, week on week, looking at Seek, looking at all these other job companies to think where I wanted to pivot to. And I reached out to some recruitment companies as well, where I gave them a resume and explained to them roughly what I enjoyed. And I remember my partner at the time, because he worked in the corporate world, he said to me, have you considered being like an office manager or a receptionist? Because they're kind of like the mothers to everyone. You take care of people, but you can apply that customer journey lens to everyone. And I thought about it, and I thought, hey, this is actually something that I resonate with. So I remember digging into it a bit deeper and going, you know what? We're just going to apply for some of the jobs. And I ended up getting a job at the tech side of Woolworths. So we pivoted to that. But that's another conversation for another time. But my biggest learning from hairdressing was communication is really key, because I know that my biggest learning and biggest mistake was when I cut this woman's fringe. So I remember her sitting down getting really excited about talking about bangs and how she wanted them done. And the way that she explained it to us as hairdressers, when you use the word fringe or bangs, we automatically think it's the fringe that sits just around your eyebrow level. So I remember blow drying her hair and cutting it dry, and the first snip that I did was just below the eyes, just so it gave me a bit of leeway. And I remember cutting that and spinning her around the chair and asking, how is that length? And it's almost as if the world had stopped and her jaw had come down so far that I knew that I had done something really, really wrong. And she said, oh my God, that's not the bangs that I was kind of talking about. And I said to her immediately, do you have a photo of what you're after? And she said, yes, let me look it up. So she ended up looking it up on Google, and what she was talking about was actually more of a face framing pieces. So in hairdressing, they're more layered fringes, so almost similar to what I kind of have now, which kind of start more around your jaw. People kind of float around this kind of space there, but we wouldn't call that bangs or a fringe in hairdressing terminology. So we ended up styling it for her, and I educated her on how she could style this, and I gave her a complimentary roller that she could sleep in at night, so it could help her train her hair to actually take that style in. Because when you actually cut your hair more than a few inches off, it has this kind of reaction to it where all the weight's gone, so it doesn't know what to do with itself, so it can kind of flick another way. So it's educating her on how to train it, but also letting her know that if she wanted to trim in a few weeks' time, she'd come in, it's completely complimentary. But the biggest learning for me there was almost back to the TAFE experience, which is that we need to communicate. And sometimes we might communicate something to someone, but they might not be talking about the same thing, even though it sounds like it's the same thing. So going forward from that experience, I remember talking to all my future clients going, if they had an idea of something, or if they talked about ash blonde, because an ash blonde in my head is a grey blonde that has no yellow to it. But sometimes people would come in and say, they want ash blonde, but it's really more of a Goldilocks kind of blonde. So I asked them for pictures instead. So that taught me a lot. But it was really interesting because that same client that I messed up the fringe for, she ended up coming back and she loved it because she ended up falling in love with her hair, but because her partner ended up loving it too. So it was super interesting, but such a big learning experience for me. And that's where I've taken that to wherever I've kind of gone in life, whether it's through relationships with friends, family, partners, or colleagues, or even complete random strangers, that it's like we shouldn't take things at face value and assume that this is what someone means. If we're not aware, or we don't know exactly what it is someone's talking about, just pause and stop and think, is it they're talking about X or is it Y? And ask them. Maybe it's not even X or Y. Maybe it's a Z. And also hairdressing really taught me how to build my own confidence up, that we humans want to connect with one another, and sometimes we connect in different ways, because I started it off as a complete observer, just looking at things and observing and thinking things in my head. But in time, I started to train myself by pushing myself out of my own comfort zone by talking to people. Because I think what stopped me in the beginning was, well, I'm not a hairdresser. I don't know what the heck I'm talking about, but we don't always have to talk about hair. We could have talked about any other subject that could have been relatable to those clients. And after coming out of hairdressing, my confidence really exploded after that. But we moved into the corporate world. And that's a story for another time.